Hey there guys, and welcome back. So, we have the Dremel press, kind of. We will go ahead and do a quick demo, and we will talk about everything that has gone wrong with this design, and why you should definitely not build this design, because I've made mistakes. So, that's where we're at right now. I'll go ahead and demo it really quick, and then we will move on with our lives. As you can see, I put a bubble vial in here. I also have one over here. Obviously, we're not staring at that one right now, but you can see this is off by a little bit. I just put this bubble vial on my desk just to prove that it's my desk that's off and not the Dremel press. Even if the Dremel press was off, I'm not too worried about right now. A, it could be tweaked and put back in line, and B, again, this design is not worth building. So we're going to go ahead. I'm going to mute the mic really quick, turn this thing on, do a quick drill within 3mm drill bit, and we will move on with our lives. So I'll see you in just a half second. Okay, so I actually didn't go all the way through, but it's one of those things. It's a drill press. It works, in theory. Where to start with this? There is a bunch that is incorrect. Basically, the main premise of how I designed this is incorrect. I am going to hop us over to YouTube really quick, because I'm going to show you where exactly I went wrong and how exactly this should have been built. So over here, this is the original video. This is very beginning, part 1, where I start talking about how I'm expecting it to work. As you can see on the left-hand side here, I've got the frame, and this frame looks exactly like the frame that we've built. Okay. Here's where the problem comes in, and I'm going to mute myself so that I'm not talking over myself. Here I'm talking about the lever arm, the lever that's going to go, and I say that the back end of the lever is going to be attached to the frame, and then here's the carriage right here. That's really important. That is very, very important. And I kind of knew that was important, but I didn't give it that much thought. And one of those things, again, as I've said many, many times throughout this series, both in this first episode, you'll hear me say it many times, and as we're working through it, and the reason it took so long to get through it is I did not have a good idea of where I was going with this. I did not want to build the same exact thing as everybody else. I wanted to build something different. And unfortunately, I did not consider why so many presses are built the same exact way. And this right here is the key. This carriage in front of the frame is the big key that I totally missed out on, and it came back to bite me. So if we hop back over to the camera right now, first off, let me just say, obviously, yes, this is straight on my desk. It is not on the raised frame. I did not bother because, again, this is not going to work, and this is not going to work because of this. As you can see, I have completely changed how this works here, and you may not be able to see, but again, we'll go into Fusion. So this bottom part is different, and if we hop over to Fusion, 3, 2, 1, here you go. So let me grab my keyboard. As you can see, we now have a completely front part, and the reason we have a completely different front part is because if I lower this down here, if I was working off this blue part right here, which was our original bottom frame, and it's limited actually because I shortened this up after I did this, as you can see, the Dremel, where the Dremel sticks out with the drill bit, or whatever we have in there, whatever, call it, whatever, that would be in line with this blue frame, and we would be stuck. Obviously, in the model right here, I have a little bit of leeway because, again, this bottom blue part was bigger before, but even then, the best I had was the bottom of the blue part, which means that the bottom of the Dremel, because again, this right here was coplanar. This right here was coplanar with this. Best I had was down to this purple bottom holder right here, which meant that the drill bit stuck out to like here plus a little bit. And that was with a good amount of stick out on the drill bit, which may not be preferable. So, that being the case, I had to really quick, and by really quick I mean, obviously, this was supposed to air last Saturday, and I didn't bother airing it till today. But I had to redesign this front part to attach on so that we can actually clear this bottom extrusion with the press itself. However, that also means that the press cannot go any further than a little bit past the bottom extrusion. Again, if you bring this all the way down, my limits are not quite set correct, but one of those things. Let's see, edit joint limits, and the bottom one here, let's just drag this all the way down here for demonstration purposes. It's going to overlap a little bit, but yeah, so we'll stop it right there. So as you can see, even now, that's the most clearance you can imagine. Drill bit sticking out here by however much. That's the most clearance I have right now, which is why this drill press is a problem. Most drill presses actually press off this thing, the front carriage here, and that is on a separate rod. So these rods right here would actually be out in front of the frame in theory that I have here. Again, if we do a redesign, that will be a bit different. But this whole entire carriage should move on a different plane than whatever is keeping it held upright. And that's the big thing I missed. And that allows you to take this whole entire carriage up and down however far as the run out is on, not run out, but however far the travel is on the rods you have. So that is the big thing I missed in this design, was not recognizing that the part that's holding the Dremel needs to travel further than the rest of the machine. So yeah, that was the big issue here. Now, a couple other things that happened here. Obviously, as I mentioned, I added in the bubble levels for fun. Right now, because I shortened up the bottom carriage, the distances here are different from what I cut the rods at originally. So that means that my rods technically are not correctly sized. I would have to cut them down. That's not that big of a deal, but that's also not something I'm going to bother with right now because, again, this design does not necessarily work. Now, I'm going to go ahead and pop us over to the camera really quick while we're talking about the resetting mechanism. Camera, here we go. As you can see, I slapped some rubber bands on here with my rubber band tensioners, okay? I had talked about, well, in the video that I just showed you, the part 1, I had talked about putting compression springs down here. Those take out space, which take away from the travel of the carriage, which in this specific design is really, really bad. We can't lose any more travel on this design because this design is broken, fundamentally. So I couldn't put compression springs down here to reset the bottom carriage. I could have put torsion springs on the joints here, but that seems all sorts of fidgety to me. It could have happened, but would have taken a lot of time and frankly not worth the effort. So I slapped some rubber bands around here. I put these guys in here, these little hooks for an M3 bolt to go through, and then you could do the same exact thing with these rubber bands through these hoops. So in theory, if this was not the original design, which this is, the top part was the original design and therefore does not have that feature, you could actually throw some bolts here and here and then take this rubber band, instead of being around the frame, the wings here, instead of being around the wings here, you would put it through the M3s instead. That makes it easier to service. The way this is now, I actually have to take the whole entire thing apart in order to get the rubber band around the wings. However, again, that's not too much of an issue. The lead screw works as expected. You know, it works exactly as intended, so I'm not too concerned about that. And I'm running into a little bit of problems with positioning on these guys. So basically this hole right here, or all these holes really, for the thumb screws, need actually to be a bit oversized because real life, these slots are not lining up. So one of those things, because these are, because the pressure of the T-nut on the plastic is the thing holding it into place, these can be a bit oversized, so that, I'll see if you can't see it on camera, but yeah, with the lighting, you can maybe see it a little bit on the inside there. The hole is not exactly precise to the extrusion slot, so therefore, when I have the bolt in here, it actually grinds a bit against the edge right here, which again, I can go ahead and take a 6mm or a 7mm, 6.5mm, whatever drill bit, and just open this up, just ream this out to fix that. But again, at this point, not worth the effort because it is borked. These parts back here, before I changed the sizes of this so that this could no longer close together, this was working just fine on the previous model. Again, have not bothered changing the rod sizes in front here in order to allow this to close all the way up. We got through bolts right here holding the front carriage on. That's all that is. So I've got some lock nuts, as you can see, back behind here, back behind the Dremel, just hidden away. And those have some through bolts holding it together. So those are the changes I made. That's how I have it functional at any rate. This was a good experience, you know, at the very least. One of those things. There were plenty of interesting design decisions made, plenty of ideas that I got to test out that for the most part worked out. Like even the handle right here, as funny as it looks, still works out. It does have, let's go back to camera really quick, the potential, if you don't pull it straight, to cant a little bit like this. But in playing around with it a little bit, I have not found too much of an issue just pulling straight down. Like I don't actually find myself twisting it. The twisting it, it's a couple different things. So if I glued these rods down into the plastic, then it wouldn't be able to twist because the rods can't twist. Right now, this is twisting. Yeah, the rods are actually twisting in the plastic right now is part of the problem. The joint also does not help. In theory, the joint should have very little flex in it because M3 bolt and an M3 hole should be darn close, especially because M3 drill bits are a little bit undersized in my experience. It seems like, at any rate, it seems like M3 drill bits are a little bit undersized. May just be the batch I got, whatever. So, handle, interesting idea, works decently. Happy with that. I will say that the linear bearings, I mentioned when I first bought them for the other project, that they were the crappier, less expensive kind. So you do feel a little bit of grinding in there. Yeah, actually you can see this on camera. So I got a good amount of lithium grease packed into those guys, which is why the rails are all sorts of greasy. And they still grind a bit. Now part of that may be because these are nominally 5/16 rods, not 8mm rods, and then I clean them up with sandpaper, so they're technically slightly smaller than that. Could be that. Could be a little bit of, I guess in this point I could say run out in the system. Just a little bit of slop. There we go. Slop is the better word in the system. Anything else to say? Let's hop back over to Fusion. Anything else? Oh, yes. We'll hop back to camera. So, I had this cap. I had it on originally. This is the cap that goes over top the LM8s to keep them in. These things are pressed so hard in here that I actually found out that it was not necessary. Also, if I wanted to use this cap, it would make more sense to also put a cap on top of the bottom carriage, which is not something I considered, because the bottom carriage, in theory, if these LM8s were going to slide out, would have the same exact problem. But as you can see, I'm not using the cap at all because these things are not going anywhere. So the cap was an interesting idea, but not at all necessary. The only reason you would want the cap at this point is actually to keep grit out, to stop grit from getting down in there. But frankly, grit is going to get on your rails anyway and then get sucked up in there, so I don't know how much that helps. And let's take a quick look at, oh, this was the original design as we had it before. Again, compared to the design where we have a two-piecer that sits low. So this was the design that I realized, oh crap, this is not actually going to fit. So this is a good chunk of plastic that, unfortunately, hopefully, one of those things, I got a bag, okay, in case I ever do get a shredder, but for all I know, it's just going to end up in landfill, unfortunately. And then we also had this guy, which was basically the spacing of these. Let me pick this up, see if we can't see this. The Dremel, I really roughed out the Dremel size in Fusion, and the Dremel tapers towards the bottom, so I ended up with a lot more space to put these through bolts on than in the model, and therefore you can see how close these through bolts are to here and how big this gap is right here. So I went ahead and shrunk this gap down and put more meat on here. That was the change from the previous one to this one. Or this one to the previous. Yeah. You get me. So, I think that's just about it. These guys, just because I have them sitting on my desk, these are just the guys I used to bang out the LM8s. They just go in the slots on the bottom here. Not that guy, this guy. So they just go in there, and then I just hammer out the LM8s out of their press fit. Again, they're in there pretty tight, so it takes a little bit of work to get them out, but just a little peg to knock them out. These could be a bit longer. I probably should. Well, it's one of those things. I may do with these guys, but in theory, if I was going to print these again, they should be a bit longer because they only get the LM8 out by like maybe 5 or 6 millimeters, and you can't really grab the LM8 and pull it out from there. It really needs to be knocked most of the way out. So that is what these guys are for. And they do have a tight fit just because I didn't want them wobbling around in there while I was trying to hammer them out, so they are very tight in there. And that is that. I guess, you know what, just one last thing. One very last thing. As you can see, I also have a hole down here. This was my original hole. I found out when drilling, or after drilling this lead screw hole, that it's best off to actually assemble this first and then take one side off and the carriage after you make sure that everything is lined up, and drill inside of the frame. So keep this right here, keep this bottom or top, this is technically the top, keep the top plastic piece in line, the top holder, the top rod holder in place, and then use that to guide your drill bit, your 8mm drill bit, 8.5mm drill bit through, instead of measuring and marking and drilling. That's what I did on this guy. I measured and drilled out this guy, and he was just a hair off, and that meant that the lead screw was catching on the very edge here. And one of those things, I just decided, you know what, we're going to flip this around. This bottom is going to become the top over here, and then I'll just make sure everything is lined up, make sure everything is squared, and then take the bottom off, take the carriage off, and like I said, drill straight through where this is in position so that we know it's exactly in place. So that was the last trick here on assembly that I had to figure out. And now I think that's everything. So I do have some extra stuff that I will be posting based on this project. Most specifically, I made a couple different angled corner brackets. They're actually end brackets. What I made was end brackets. I'm going to go ahead and make a full set of end and corner brackets for different angles. You'll recall on the one project, I can't remember which it was, but we spent like 45 minutes making it might have been half an hour. We might have spent half an hour making a 45-degree end bracket. Well, I went ahead and did a bunch of that stuff, like 135, a couple more 45s and brackets. So I'm going to go ahead and get those together and fill it out and make it a complete set, and then I'll post those online. The purpose was is you will recall it from the first video, we talked about this frame potentially coming out the side here, or coming out in different orientations, so that we could clear out space underneath the frame for the Dremel press, for any object that we want to drill through in the Dremel press, so it has plenty of space to be maneuvered in. So that was the purpose of making the 135s, was that would, you know, head off in this direction, and then obviously an opposite one on the bottom to get it square again. And then we'd have a very wide base for the frame, so that we'd have plenty of room on the table to move the stock around in. So yep, I think I've stopped myself 3 or 4 times now thinking of new things to say, but that should be all of it. So anyway, yep, this was an adventure. I do have a new design in mind. It's one of those things that will be very similar to everything else that exists in the world. However, one of those things, while I personally can get a hold of 1-inch round stock. While I can personally get a hold of 1-inch round stock with relative ease, it's not actually the most prevalent drop in our shop just because we have many uses for it. But I do have 1 or 2 sitting around. I could use 1-inch round bar to make a very similar to the commercially available Dremel press. However, that's not readily available for everybody else. So for that reason, I'm going to redo a design with the 8mm and done more correctly. And I say more correctly because I don't know. It may not turn out nearly as good as everything else, but it's one of those things. I like the design process, so we will try. We will try to get as best as we can. Because, again, sticking with 8mm because it's available easily for everybody online. And that is the plan moving forward. Now, the only question is whether or not I stream that. Just because, obviously, this is part 4 or 5. Let's check really quick. Clicking on the internets. The last part was... Where are we at? Alright, last part was part 3. So this is part 4. So this was a 4-part series when it really shouldn't have been, unfortunately. If you include this episode. So, one of those things. I've taken up a lot of time doing this. I am tempted to do design off stream. However, I think I have a good enough idea now because of all this learning that I did of where I'm going with this that I could stream it. So, that's up in the air. We'll see whether or not I stream it or whether or not I just release a I made a thing video for the Dremel Press version 2. Which should, again, actually function because I recognize what is wrong here. So, that is the entirety of this stream. Right after, maybe not right after the stream. What time is it? Alright, no. So, in about half an hour, I will be going live with another episode of This Gaia if you're interested. Otherwise, check out all the other videos on my channel if you have time and are interested. And otherwise, if you have been watching, thank you, and I hope you have a great and wonderful day, afternoon, or evening, wherever you're at in the world, and I will catch you next time.